Hello everyone, I hope you guys are doing great and staying safe. Let's focus on the topic of change today. One of you sent me a private message the other day that you're struggling with change, and I personally can relate to that because change is not easy. I have had my own struggles with change, but I tried to find out what is the ideology behind, or what is the explanation behind when it comes to resistance to change. Why we're all resisting change the way we do, even though in most cases we know that that change is very beneficial. We know that it's very helpful. Why we're not able to go ahead and jump in with the process of change. So I came across work of Dr. A.J. Schiller. Now, I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing their name correctly, but I hope I do. I think their work is mostly in the context of organizational psychology, but we can borrow that wisdom in day-to-day life as well, because one of the beauty of psychology is that it's applicable across most situations that we come across in our daily lives. So one thing that Dr. Schiller, again, I'm not sure if that is a pronunciation, but anyways, I'm going to go ahead and use that pronunciation, that, change is basically a leap of faith. A leap of faith, meaning that you're gathering all the courage that you have within you, and through that courage, you're going to be making a choice for yourself that in the long run, you have an idea that this goal that you have will work hopefully in your favor. Now, change is something that we kind of weigh the pros and cons of. This is something that would be more helpful if I do it in the long run compared to what I don't feel like doing it. So it requires some self-discipline in this area, that even though it is hard, it is a huge commitment, but I'm going to do that because I don't want to stay here where I am right now. The other factor about change is that there is that belief that you believe that what you're going to be doing is actually beneficial for you in the long run. And that belief is quite strong in you, and you know that if you do it, it's going to benefit. In other words, your belief system or value is in line with that change that you're looking for. So with Dr. Schiller's work, it looks like he identifies some of the factors that why as a human beings we're resistant to change. We don't, even though sometimes we buy the idea or buy into the idea of why we want to do what we want to do, but at the same time, it looks like there is something within us that is keeping us away from that as well. Like it gets in the way of our goal and what we would like to do in the moment to work towards that goal. So what he identified in some of these characteristics of people that, or maybe organization in this case, that would be resisting to change because of these factors. So one of the factors is that when perception of loss or change is greater than the positive outcome. In other words, you're sticking to your normal routine because you think that I'm going to lose more when I do the change, when I go towards change or achieve the change. For example, there are people who are smoking, and there is that nicotine craving for them, and they kind of imagine that in the future, if they give up smoking, they don't have that nicotine urge or that impulse from you that you need to have that smoke will be lost. And it's a sense of loss that some people, although I'm using this as an example, but I do acknowledge that quitting a smoke is a very complex process, but I'm just simplifying it for the sake of understanding how the loss is perceived to be greater than the actual gaining of that change, because someone in this very overly simplified example of smoking, they're anticipating they're going to be losing something that is pleasurable, but they don't know what they're gaining. So therefore, it's so hard for them to stay, to stay connected to that goal and stay committed. So this would be one example of why, foreseeing some greater loss would be preventing you from changing. Another example in terms of emotion regulation would be that you lose that spontaneity, and you don't like that. It's quite sometimes, you know, a good feeling of release when we're emotionally reactive. It gives you an instant gratification. So losing that might actually get in the way of, you know, wanting to be more emotionally regulated and mindful later on, maybe in the long run. So the other thing that he is kind of identifying is that not having a role model for change. So if you're someone who is surrounded by people who are, let's say, usually emotionally reactive, then it's more challenging for you, because even if you want to become more emotionally regulated person, in this case, you don't have that inspiring personality in your life right now. So that can be, something that can get in the way of the change, because at this point you don't have a full proof of someone who is, doing very well when they're emotionally regulated. So in this case, it is the unknown factor of, I'm not quite sure what it would look like because I don't have the evidence right here, right now. Another thing that he identifies is that a lack of belief in being competent when it comes to change. In other words, you don't trust yourself. It's almost like this is too good to be true. That if you want to quit that smoking, you've tried that in the past and it never worked, and what would be the point of trying this again one more time? What makes you to believe that this time it's going to be successful? So this is an example where you're actually questioning your own competency because you don't believe that you can stick to this goal, that because you failed in the past, therefore you're going to be failing again. Again, going back to emotion regulation example, that you've been quite reactive in terms of your emotions. You get that instant release of the emotion, and then sometimes it happens so automatically that even if you don't want to have your emotions to be released that way, but it happens when you're upset, when you're angry, and then you kind of blow off, and that kind of gives you maybe a discouraging message that during these contexts, when you try to be emotionally regulated, you couldn't do it. How come you're believing that you're going to do that next time? So that would be another example of that how competency is the perception of lack of competency is getting in the way of that change. Another thing that he is highlighting that seems to be getting in the way of that change process is that feeling overwhelmed and overloaded. So basically he says that stress or fatigue kills effort. So when you are really overwhelmed, there's either you consume too much information, you got too much of pros and cons, and you got to a point where you're feeling so confused and overwhelmed, then in this case you get to that resignation place where you're resigning. You're like, I'm not going to engage to this process because I'm too overwhelmed. I need to go and distract myself with something else. So at this point, fatigue, you're so tired, you're exhausted because you searched the internet about this and this and this for such a long time that by the time you expected yourself to go towards that change, now you're too tired to actually even start the process. Going back to the example of going for a walk, you found out that it boosts some serotonin or dopamine in your brain, and then you also found that how it's going to help, your heart rate or your heart functioning, and then by the time you search that and you just notice that outside is also a little bit cooler than it was 2 hours ago because you got carried away with the internet research that you were doing, now you feel too tired to actually go for a walk. So again, that is a really good example how fatigue can kill the effort towards change. So another thing that he is highlighting is that how change coming from someone else would be too skeptical for you. In other words, this person hasn't earned your trust or your respect, and coming from another authority or whatever they are, another source, you're skeptic about that information. You don't take it at the face value, and also you're maybe a little bit too skeptic towards that information, to the point that it's kind of hinders your progress towards that change that you want to. You're getting a lot into what is the cons of this type of this type of information that I'm getting, compared to what is the pros in this case. So again, some skepticism, I think Dr. Scholler also makes that clear, that some healthy dosage of skepticism is actually good and helpful for the process of change and maybe an overall well-being. Whenever you're receiving information, you don't want to be completely open in an indiscriminate way. So that might not be healthy and helpful, but a little bit of skepticism is normal. However, what I'm talking about right now is about those people who seem to feel or stay stuck in skepticism. Unfortunately, they are a little too much on the side of criticizing the information that comes to them instead of finding the value in that information. So they kind of get swayed by the criticism of that source. So therefore, that seems to be getting in the way of change whenever we want to change ourselves, by not trusting the source of the information, by not having respect towards them, and then we are too skeptic to actually receive the information in this case. So another thing that they identify is that when we notice change as a threat to notion of self. Now let's go back to emotion regulation skills. That for emotion regulation, we might feel that this is not me. I cannot be a regulated person. I'm a highly expressive human being. I would like to show my emotion in my relationships, regardless of what happens to my relationship in the long run. I would like to be myself. And there is that movement we have that always emphasizes that be yourself, be your authentic self, and which is really helpful when we're not causing any sort of damage to our social and personal relationships. Then being yourself is definitely something to celebrate and kind of monopolize on. But at the same time, there is that misconception that if I am myself, then I would be accepted by my, family, friends, and lovers as well. However, yes, there are some aspect of your personality that will be accepted, cheersed, and celebrated, but as a human beings, we have flaws, we have weaknesses as well. Now those flaws and weaknesses, if they come out of you in a unfiltered way that causes some damage in your relationship, then that's the example of how change is so important in this case, that when you regulate yourself when it comes to your weaknesses, you can actually have more efficient and more helpful and more functional relationship with people, instead of being quite reactive in the moment. And I'm using this emotion regulation as a mostly I'm referring to in the context where people are finding themselves exploding and then they regret later on. So I'm not necessarily promoting that any emotional reaction is wrong. So I just want to be very clear about that. But I'm referring to those kind of emotional situations where you without any control, it feels like it pours out of you all of a sudden, and that is something that you later on regret with what you said or how you how you behaved. So you were already not liking that state when it comes to your emotion kind of should spontaneously kind of pouring out and causing damage to your relationship. So that's what I'm referring to. I just want to be clear that it's not about all type of emotion, or that you should be a very regulated person. So that's definitely not. I'm referring to, basically referring when emotions are problematic and it's not helping you or your relationships, and that's when we want to use some emotional regulation skills. Okay, what's another thing that they identify to be the getting in the way of change? So again, kind of, before I even go towards the next one, this one just kind of summarizes that when I feel like I'm losing a part of myself, then that would be getting in the way of change, even though that part of yourself may not be very functional in the example of emotion regulation that I gave you. But at the same time, it is quite normal and human nature to be clinging to that side of us. It's like, this is so me. You know, all of us want to. I've done it also. There were times that there was something about me that was not helpful, but I was clinging to that dearly. We do that. This is really a good example that, again, how that gets in the way of the change that we would like to achieve. So another thing that they kind of highlight is that how sense of loss would be also, which is similar to this one, that you know, which is similar to that threat to oneself and who I am, but at the same time there is that perception of I'm going to be losing more, again clinging to that side of me that I enjoyed. I think that is very much me, and you know, if I'm using another skill, then that is a loss for me, and I cannot, you know, afford that loss, or I don't feel comfortable with that loss. And going to a smoking example is that, you know, again, losing that nicotine, you know, benefit that you're getting. And the last piece that they highlight is how the belief about change is to be bad. You know, all those interpretation and those meanings that we assign to change, that how we make it in our mind as something bad, that tends to get in the way of change as well. For example, with the walking example, if you tell yourself, oh my God, there's too much heat, oh my God, or, you know, I can't go, or rightfully so, sometimes there is a lot of heat and you shouldn't be going, but sometimes just kind of keeping an eye on that, you know, those excuses that we make. So those excuses are generating bad meaning towards the change process, that, oh, I don't want to do it because X, Y, and Z. And then you convince yourself that it's so bad to actually go and do that. And therefore you convince yourself how, you know, this is bad and this is not helpful. All right, guys, I hope this helps you to notice what gets in the way of the change that you're trying to achieve, and what are some of the ways that, first of all, catch those kind of thinking, and then what are some of the ways that you make change more prominent and more, I don't know, what is the word that I'm looking for? That the change is the most important thing that you want to do in your life, and the reason you do it, you have a really good explanation to why you want to do it. So find that out, find why that change is very important. What is the cost of staying the same? And based on that cost, you can actually, you know, use that towards why you want to have that change. So I have to go. My son is knocking on the door. He is getting impatient. And I will see you guys in the next video. Stay safe, and again, have a great day. Bye. Yeah, that's him.